Once a month, when the moon reaches its highest point in the sky and the wild creatures call out to the night, he emerges from a private sanctuary in an undisclosed location outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. Arrayed in his priestly vestments, carrying forth the good news that comic books and graphic novels aren't just for kids, that they aren't just mass and spandex superheroes, that storytelling in a graphic format can be so much more. He is the graphic novel apostle.
Hello and welcome back to the Graphic Novel Apostle podcast. I'm your host, Mark Ohrenberger. I'm so happy to be here with you, as always. This time on a rare midweek mini episode of the podcast. And I'm coming to you right now not so much because I wanted to, but because I feel like I have to. Guys, over the last 2 days, I read a comic that got me more excited than I have in a very long time. And maybe I shouldn't even call it a comic. It's billed as an illustrated novella. I'm talking about a book called Lookout by Dan Baillie with art by Tim Bradstreet. If we want to think about this in comic book terms, it's an oversized one-shot. But frankly, that's probably not the best way for us to be thinking about it. The description on the front of the book, an illustrated novella, is probably the best way to describe it. Now, this is published by AWA, which is a smaller comic book publisher who has put out stories that I have really enjoyed over the last few years. And I want to call out particularly a book called The Fourth Man, which we are going to get to on this podcast. It was an excellent, excellent series. But I've read several AWA books in the last, maybe 3 years that I've enjoyed a whole lot. And then a company called Vertigo Entertainment. Now, don't be confused, don't be thinking about DC's imprint Vertigo, but rather this is a television and film production company. So I had not heard anything about this project that AWA and Vertigo Entertainment were doing together called the Future of Fear Project. But I did a little digging around online and I found this article in Variety from June of 2024 announcing this partnership between AWA and Vertigo, in which the two companies had put together this project where they're going to try and bring forward more great horror stories to be presented both in graphic format, published by AWA, and then also in film and television with the expertise of Vertigo Entertainment on that side of the equation. Now, it's not entirely clear from the little bit of information I've been able to dig up thus far whether every one of these projects is going to go to both a printed graphic format and look for opportunities for a television or film project, or whether some will go in one bucket and some will go in the other. I'll be interested to see where this goes, but I'll tell you what, I think this first outing from the Future of Fear project, Lookout, as great as it was as this illustrated novella, would be awesome as a movie as well. So you guys know that I spend a lot of time reading comics and graphic novels these days. And as a result, frankly, I'm not reading as much prose fiction as I used to. It's something I certainly enjoy to do very much, and I still mix in a little bit once in a while. I just dedicate so much of my free time to either reading about comics or talking about them here on the podcast to you guys. Well, in using the term an illustrated novella, you get a bit of both here. So this book that's been put out by AWA is an oversized prestige format book. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with that term, your regular floppy comic book is about 6 3/4 inches wide by about 10 1/4 inches tall, whereas this book in the prestige format is 8.5 by 11. It's also quite a bit longer than a regular comic. This one coming in at 64 pages, so it's almost 3 times the length of a regular comic. And it's square bound, so the title of the project is actually printed on the side of the book, like you would see with a regular book that might be sitting on your shelf at home. And this book is not presented like a regular graphic novel or a comic. You don't have individual framed panels and characters with word balloons or thought balloons talking to each other, or those little boxes that narrate what's going on in the characters' heads. Rather, this is a regular prose work with tons of illustrations, basically on every page, oftentimes sort of breaking up the page to provide the reader with a little bit of a visual to hang on to. I suppose really it's like what early reader books are like, where you get some text on the page and a picture to help give you a visual cue as to what's going on. Same idea here, but these visuals are fantastic. Tim Bradstreet is primarily known as a cover artist within the comics industry, so that is, while he sometimes does the interiors of comic books, mostly he gets hired to do really detailed, really gorgeous covers for comics. And some of his best known have been on The Punisher for Marvel and Hellblazer or John Constantine comics for DC. His art is highly detailed, like almost photorealistic. And this is a horror book. Guys, the presentation was something that I thought was wonderful with this book, but it is the story that caught me. I had never heard of this author before, Dan Baillie, and from everything I can find online, it looks like this might be his first work in the comics industry, and maybe even his first published work at all. And from some of the back matter that's provided in this book as well, I understand that this was something that he wrote and originally published in large part on Reddit, on a subthread that dealt with telling scary stories. And this is a scary story. This is what brought me to the microphone here tonight to talk to you guys. We haven't done just a whole ton of horror on this podcast so far, but I love horror. I love to be afraid. I love a story that makes me want to stop and kind of catch my bearings a little bit and think about the real world for a few minutes before diving back into it. And this is one that did that. So you guys know that here at the Graphic Novel Apostle podcast, we go deep with spoilers. Not today. I do not want to spoil one bit of this story, so frankly, I'm going to barely give you much of a setup for it, because I want you to go out and read this yourself. And when you do, I want you to feel fear like I felt fear when I was reading this. Here's the premise. You have a man who is recently divorced, down on his luck. He doesn't really have a steady or well-paying job. He doesn't really have any family or deep connected friendships in the area where he is. He's not deeply ingrained in his town. He feels like he'd be just as happy to pick up and go to a different city and find a different gig and do a different thing altogether and maybe get a fresh start at life. And so he goes about applying to all different kind of jobs on the internet, whatever he can find openings for, wherever he can find those openings. And he gets a response from one. And it's one that, frankly, he barely even remembers applying for. It's a position in a national park where he will be manning a lookout tower. This is a high tower about 100 feet in the air that he is going to go and live in and watch over the woods in this one area of the national park. Make sure there are no fires, make sure there's no camping going on in places where that's off limits, and more or less oversee what happens in his region of the forest. So when the offer to take this job comes along, Oscar, our main character, decides, yeah, sure, what the heck, I'll go out and take it. Now, he doesn't have much information, and really he's not met anybody because he applied online, so he doesn't know exactly who the folks are that are giving him instructions, but sure enough, he packs up his stuff and he goes out into the woods. He finds this tower that he's going to be set up in, and he climbs the 100 or so foot staircase up to the little hut that's got windows on 4 sides that's going to be where he lives and conducts his work. Now, he's been told that when he gets there, there's going to be a radio in the tower, and he can use that radio to contact one of the other tower attendants who's performing a similar job in a not too far off part of the forest. And that person will sort of fill him in on what the day-to-day is. They just need him to get out there and get started right away. So he does. He gets himself set up in the tower. He makes radio contact with a woman named Allison who's minding a nearby tower, and learns from her that there should be a guidebook that's there in the hut that he can take a look through that'll give him a little more detail about what all is expected of the job and what the standards are for how he's going to be performing his work. So he tracks down this ranger handbook there in his hut, and when he picks it up, a sheet of loose-leaf notebook paper falls out. Handwritten on this page is the title, Rules to Avoid the Weeping Lady. I like it already, guys. And then it's got 9 handwritten rules. And I'm not going to read them all to you, but I'm going to read a few of them to you just to give you a sense of what he's looking at. Rule number 1. If you see a woman in the woods weeping to herself, don't approach her or draw attention to yourself. Return to your tower. Let's jump down to rule number 5. At night, if you hear someone running up the stairs to your tower, turn on the main light until morning. If you don't do this by the time she reaches the top, it's too late. Ooh, I think rule number 6 may be my favorite of all. If you wake up and see the weeping lady staring at you through your window, hide under your covers and hold your breath. She will come into your hut, and you will feel her breathing right above you as if she is hovering over you. Do not breathe. This will last only a few seconds. Once you feel her leave, turn on the main light until morning. So guys, that's just a little sample to give you an idea of what these rules are. Now, Oscar has no further information. He does not know anything about a weeping lady. He does not know anything about the history of this forest or this part of the forest where he is. He does not know anything about his coworker Allison in the next tower, or really know anything about the guy who hired him and sent him out here to do this job. He also doesn't know and starts to wonder whether this is just part of a prank. And so he doesn't ask Allison or try to contact some other coworker somehow to get a little more information about this weeping lady, because he doesn't want to look like a fool if this is just a joke they play on every new person. Well, over the next 60 pages, we are going to get the real story of what's going on out in the woods, if anything. We are going to find out why these rules are important. Friends, is there any scarier setting than somewhere deep in the forest, alone at night? And by placing this character, Oscar, in this far reach of the forest, in fact, early in the book it says that he has to drive real far into the forest as far as he can and then park his car at the edge of where a path or a road will take him and then hike in several hours before he gets to his tower. It eliminates some of those modern day issues that horror storytellers have to contend with about people having their cell phones and being able to access a world of information on the internet and find out what's real and what's not. Because he's so far from any kind of civilization, none of that is going to be available to help him. And then you have the fact that he is high up in the air in this lookout tower. Because it's a lookout tower that's supposed to enable him to spot fires out in the woods, it's windows on all sides. All the way around, he's going to be exposed. And now he's got some rules that he has just discovered that sound very scary about a weeping lady. And I got to tell you guys, this setup is perfect. And the execution of the story after it is outstanding. I have this odd physiological response to fear. I smile real big, and when fear gets to the point with me that I can barely contain it anymore, I laugh. It's just how my body responds. I don't know how common or uncommon that is, but do you guys remember that movie, The Strangers? It had Liv Tyler, where she's alone in a cabin, or what is it? Maybe she and her boyfriend or fiance are alone in a cabin in the middle of the night, and there are these, strangers that approach the cabin and want to do them harm and basically terrorize them for the course of the whole night. I went to that movie with two of my friends. Seeing that movie in the theater is the scaredest I can ever remember being watching a movie. Frankly, it's one of the scaredest times I can ever remember in my whole life. And I sat there with my two friends who looked at me like I was nuts because as the tension ratcheted up in that movie, as the walls felt like they were closing in on Liv Tyler, I chuckled like a maniac. Like other people in the theater must have thought that the Joker was attending this movie with them that night. And I had a similar reaction here. Now, it wasn't to the point where I was laughing out loud necessarily, but I was sitting in my chair where I read all my comics, and everybody else in the house had already gone to bed, and I had the lamp on, and otherwise the room was dark. and I'm reading this book, and I realize at some point that I am grinning ear to ear. I'm just smiling as big as I can. And it's not because I'm such a happy guy right at this moment. It's because I am reading this book and I am getting more and more afraid as I am reading it. And I'll tell you, it was late at night, so it was already dark as I'm sitting here reading this. And I heard something in another corner of the house. Look, it could have been the house settling a little bit. It could have been my dog in her crate where she sleeps, turning over and just getting a new position. I don't know what it was, but I felt the need to get up and go into the next room and check it out, make sure there wasn't something going on, because man, my mind started to race a little bit at this point. Now, I got kind of sleepy and didn't get to finish the book that night. I wish I could have read this all in one shot, but I also couldn't wait to get home from work the next day to pick up and continue reading this book, because man, it was great. And I found myself smiling with that big, I am terrified smile again the second night. I cannot recommend this more highly. So that's what I got for you today. You've got my full-throated endorsement for Look Out by Dan Baillie and Tim Bradstreet from AWA and Vertigo Entertainment. I hope you guys will check it out. Before I leave you, I want to let you know that we will be back with another book club episode of this podcast next week. My friend Carson Miller from the Intake Podcast is going to be joining me, and we are going to discuss King of Nowhere by W. Maxell Prince with art by Tyler Jenkins. You guys know that my book club episodes are my favorite part of doing this podcast. Carson and I have already recorded our conversation about that book. I enjoyed it a whole lot. It is a weird sci-fi book by the same writer who did the book Art Brut that we covered on episode 11 of the podcast with my friend Hannah. I probably said it back then, and I'll say it again now. I think W. Maxell Prince as a writer has the most interesting mind of any writer in comics today. He has such an unusual perspective of the world, and Tyler Jenkins, the artist co-creator of this book, really brought that to life in such a vivid way with his pencil. I'm excited to talk to you guys about that book, so please come on back this coming Monday and join us for that book club episode. Hey, I'll say to you guys as well, if you're enjoying this podcast, please do me a favor, go to whatever podcast platform you listen to your podcasts on and give us a star rating. If it's something like Apple Podcasts that you use where you can actually type in a written review of the podcast, I'd sure appreciate you to drop a couple of sentences, let people know what you think, because the audience for this podcast is growing, and I'd love to get more people to find it and join in our conversation here. So if you wouldn't mind to do that for me, I'd sure appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you back here for that episode, and until then, keep reading those comics.